You're listening to the Vint Podcast, where we bring you interviews and stories from around the world of wine and spirits. From winemakers and critics to sommeliers and master distillers, we'll explore the people and businesses who are instrumental in shaping the future of today's food and drinks culture. Enjoy the show. Hey everyone, welcome back to another episode of the Vint Podcast, production of the Vint Marketplace, your source for premium wine and spirits at vintmarketplace.com. And as always, joined by Billy Galanko. How you doing, Billy?
Doing very well. I actually have my first ever shipment from the Vint Marketplace here next to me. Pretty excited to have some. I'm going to go on a short trip coming up here to share some with some friends.
Very cool. Yeah, I've been stocking. I have gotten some small shipments before, but I've been stocking my little Vint Marketplace cellar and just got a case shipped. So I think that'll be on its way or arrive here next week. So maybe we can compare our loot.
Yeah, no, that would be great. I definitely got some gems that I wish more people would buy on our site themselves, so that's good. But a couple bottles that I'd been eyeing for a while, just working at the company. So it was fun.
Yeah, sometimes I find myself doing these interviews with producers who, I was familiar with their wines and then just never really came around to it, and then picking up a few bottles along the way. So that's, I think, what most of my stuff is over the last couple months.
Yeah, mine are what I just keep banging on about. I got a really high-end Blaufränkisch, the Pure Song by Dagenau. So it's one of the more exciting Sauvignon Blancs from a Puy Fumé that I've been really wanting to try for a long time. So that'll be pretty fun. And I got some Chablis and Beaujolais as well. But yeah.
And are you taking some on your trip?
Yeah. I go on a ski trip with college buddies every year, but I don't really ski anymore. So I just go and hang out and work while so yeah, I'm going to bring a few of these and share them with them. They've slowly got more and more into wine over the years. So it'll be nice because when my wife and I we don't normally finish a whole bottle. So I don't really have an excuse to open multiple cool things at once. So it'll be fun.
Yeah. Very good. Do you have any news to run through this week?
We do. We have one exciting announcement that's not in our actual Vint Marketplace news is that Amanda Barnes, our guest last year, South American expert, just became one of the 4 new Masters of Wine. So there are only 4 new Masters of Wine this year, and she is one of them. It's really exciting.
Yeah, that's really cool. She was talking was it Brazilian Sparkling that we got on at the end of that episode?
I think you got on it, but yeah.
Correctly. Yeah, I got on it. Well, I asked her about it. And yeah, that's very cool.
Yeah, no, she covered everything in that episode. I recommend everybody go back and listen to it. You really get excited about South American wine. If you listen to that episode, there was more breadth and depth to every region. We touched on not just Chile and Argentina, but Bolivia, Brazil, like you were mentioning. She's, they're really coming into their own now. I was like, I didn't even know they had any.
Which is funny, like coming into their own, but they've been growing wine in different ways for so long. The markets are finally discovering them in a widespread way.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, they've grown it for centuries, and now they're actually being exported. So that was exciting. Yeah, one of only 4 people in the world to gain that title this year, which is really exciting. She had mentioned she was on her research paper on the podcast, so it was cool to see that come full circle. But regarding the actual news, for those of you who don't read it each week, we have 2 pieces that I wanted to touch on. The very first one is just a quick note that the Arcadia Vineyard, which was apparently a major part of the Stag's Leap wine cellars, I guess, core blend. A lot of the core grapes come from this vineyard. It had been owned by Warren as part of the Stag Leap wine cellars, full estate. And then after his death, the ownership had moved and been in limbo for a while. And now the Marchese Antinori purchased that, and I thought that was interesting. But what I didn't realize is that Marchese Antinori is the owner of Stag's Leap Wine Cellars. Did you know that?
No, I don't think I did. They've changed hands a few times though, haven't they?
Yeah. Over time it had changed hands, and then Marchese Antinori they became part owners. I can't remember how long back, and it said in the article, you guys can read further, but then they just a handful of years ago became full owners of the estate, which I just thought was interesting. And then, they bought this vineyard to reunite it with the rest of the estate.
Very cool. Yeah, I like vineyard acquisition news and merger news.
I just thought it was interesting that something with such a heralded history and reputation in Italy was the sole owner. Because I understand some of these things like, they're partners in different things, like they're partners in Col Solare with Chateau Saint Michel up in Washington, which makes sense. But you don't really see often that they're the sole owners of some of these places. So I thought that was neat. The other part of the news that I wanted to get to was that Henri Jaillet's cellar is now getting back up into use. And do you know who Henri Jaillet is? Do you need me to give you a little
You can
TLDR?
give a little rundown. The name comes across my radar a lot.
Basically, he was one of the most famous Burgundy producers ever and for a long time. So bottles of wine that he made are selling for, upwards of $30,000-$40,000. So over the decades, he became an icon of Burgundy. He died in 2006. And that's also one of the reasons why his wines have become so expensive, is because his death corresponded right at the beginning of the big Burgundy boom too. And his family's been debating on what to do with his cellar. And this article is misleading because it says legendary Burgundy property back in business. But what's happened is his nephew is now going to be working with a partner to make wine in the old cellar. So they're going to be taking fruit from different areas around Burgundy and vinifying them there, but they're going to try to use as many of his old tools as possible. So some of the old. All right. That is a perfect transition.
Yep.
Not exactly.
We talked about the South America, about how the market's starting to receive South American wines. Rolls into our guest we have today. We have Liz Thach, Master of Wine, who is the president of the Wine Market Council. Master of Wine, again, like I said, was the first female Master of Wine in California and the 7th woman in the U.S. to become a Master of Wine. She's been at her craft for a while now and does a lot of writing on markets and consumer markets, dynamics in the domestic and global trade, really a wine market academic. And so has made that sort of the focus of her wine career, but also teaches and judges competitions, all the things that a lot of our Master of Wine friends who we have on do. But one of the first that we've had that focuses sort of day-to-day research on understanding what moves the consumer in the wine market. Really cool.
For sure. Yeah, I didn't really understand the length of time she had been doing market research. She basically taught at Sonoma State for over 20 years. And that whole time, as part of her teaching, she was either writing books to help teach the class or doing research to help basically further the wine industry. So it was interesting. I think we touched on it a bit in the podcast. She was a wine lover, but not a wine industry veteran, and just spent so much time immersed in the space and teaching it that led her actually to become a Master of Wine. She has a hobby vineyard in her backyard. So she's become really an all things wine person now, but really the core of it all has always been this research and trying to help move the wine industry forward that way.
Yeah, and she's not just behind a desk writing about markets either. I think she's been to like 70 countries, most of the major wine regions. She's written 9 books, over 200 academic articles. Yeah, super prolific as well in terms of her academic achievements, but also obviously just being in the wine industry as both a W and an enthusiast generally. It was great to hear her perspective on the wine market, some of the trends and stuff that we have talked about a little bit in previous episodes, maybe assumptions or guesses we've made about why the market is doing this or that. She was able to speak to some of those things. And yeah, a lot of really great content here. And we were glad to have Liz on. Before we get to that interview, though, check out our wine and spirits retail store, vintmarketplace.com, where you can find wines from all over the world, with one of the largest selections of wines in the U.S. and some of the most competitive pricing. Whether you're an enthusiast or a collector, the Vint Marketplace is your go-to shop for stocking your wine cellar, just like Billy and I are doing with our recent shipments. And without further ado, here is our interview with Master of Wine, Liz Thach.
All right, we are here with very special guest, Liz Thach. Thank you so much for joining today.
It's a welcome to be here. Thanks, Billy and Brady.
Yeah, it's really exciting. I know you know our COO at Vint Marketplace, Adam LaPierre, but it's also been interesting because I've read a lot of your your work and your research that you've been doing lately with the Wine Market Council and the consumer kind of trends field. So really excited to have you on to learn about your career and some of the stuff you've been writing about in recent years.
Thank you, Billy and Brady. It's a delight to be here, and I look forward to chatting with you today.
Awesome. To start out, could you give us maybe a little bit of an overview? It doesn't have to be too detailed about your background and how you got to where you are now in wine. You're doing so many different things, so it'd be great to just learn about where you started from.
Thanks so much. I actually grew up in Idaho, New Mexico, not in a wine family, and wine was not on the table. So that was something that I was introduced to in college. I went to school out in the California Bay Area. A friend took me up to Napa Valley, had a glass of wine, visited some wineries, and just fell in love with everything about it. I especially love the vineyards, being in nature, how happy the people are when you're drinking wine, and just learning about how it's made and the art and the beauty of wine and taste and what it does for culture and social occasions. So it became a hobby to begin with. And then I just started doing some self-study. At that time, started taking wine classes. I got married. My husband and I moved to Houston, Texas, big foodie scene. So joined some wine tasting groups there. And then eventually had the chance to move back to California via Denver. All this time I was actually working in the corporate world. I worked for some large Fortune 500 companies in human resources, where I got my PhD also. And so wine was still just something I did part-time. Every vacation was a trip to Napa or Sonoma or another wine region. I did all the Texas wine regions, Idaho, pretty much every Western state that had wineries. New Mexico I visited, and then a lot all over Europe. So when I finally got back to California, I got a job at Sonoma State University as a professor. And since I had already studied wine so much, they asked me to teach an introduction to wine class there, and I did. And then I started taking classes at the JC on viticulture and enology. I also took some weekend classes at UC Davis on enology, planted a small hobby vineyard, really got into it, and then eventually started studying for the Masters of Wine exam, which I passed in 2011. Billy, I know you're also studying for the Master of Wine exam, so that's fabulous.
Yeah. It's definitely quite the accomplishment. Now, the more I've learned about it, the more it seems there's to learn. But you also passed in a time where there were very few resources to help you get through. So it's very more impressive that people.
Well, I was actually the first woman to pass the Master of Wine exam on the West Coast, which surprised me because I didn't realize it at the time. And then afterwards, the California State Legislature actually gave me this recognition award, this humongous plaque, and which was really nice. So I have that hanging on my wall next to my MW diploma certification.
What was the number 7 woman in general for the whole U.S.?
Yeah, 7th in the United States. Yeah.
Yeah. Wow. That's awesome. From your education side there, actually, maybe we'll just stay on the education for a little while. How did that help shape what you wanted to do in the world of wine, being able to constantly be interacting with folks who are maybe just learning about the space in detail for the first time?
Yeah, so moving into out of the corporate world and into academia was a big culture shock. But the nice thing about working at Sonoma State University is they really wanted all their professors to be out in the community. So I was teaching, my PhD is in human resource management. So I was teaching management, strategy, and also wine. So I was out in the community, interviewing wineries, doing research in wine business. And so being in education was a really great connection with industry. And the other thing I started to do is I started volunteering to be on a lot of nonprofit wine boards. I was in Women for Wine Sense. I was on Petaluma Gap Wine Alliance. I was in Wine Spirit. I was in Wine Vision. I just started volunteering to this. A lot of these nonprofit boards are looking for people. And it was a great way to network and connect and also give back to the community. And that was super helpful. And the other thing is my third year into teaching, when I first got to Sonoma State in 2000, there were no wine business books. I got there and I'm like, where are the textbooks you want me to use? And they're like, there aren't any. So I started using like articles and Wine Business Monthly and Wine Spectator and wherever, what else I could find. And then eventually the third year into teaching with no books, I thought, this is ridiculous. I'm gonna write a book. But I didn't feel I knew enough about the whole business of wine at the time. So I did an edited book where I recruited guest authors, and I also did a lot of interviewing and guest writing of chapters. Once I had a book, then I started using that. And so now I've written 11 wine books. Didn't know that was going to happen. But so that sort of helped. And also, I obviously, as a professor, you have to publish your parish. So I was publishing a lot too. We were mainly publishing academic trade journal academic articles that nobody was reading, because nobody reads those except for academics. So then I started publishing shorter versions in trade journals. And so then started getting a little more traction, Wine Industry Insights, Wine Business Monthly, and other places like that. And then finally, my students came up to me, I think it was about right after I published the book, and my students started encouraging me to go for the Master of Wine. I was already teaching WSET part-time, and then Peter Marks and Tim Hanna also approached me and said, Liz, you just really should apply for the MW program. And I said, oh, no, there's no way I'm ever going to pass that exam. And they said, well, you can write. If you know how to write, that's a good start. I'm like, I just taste for fun. I'm not a professional taster. And they're like, we'll teach you. And of course, Billy, they do teach you how to taste. Very, very, very clear, distinct method of learning how to evaluate wine. So once I learned that, then I was able to become a wine judge. So I've actually been a professional wine judge for 15 years now, and that's taken me around the world as well. So it's a wine career, as you know, is just a wonderful, wonderful way to live life.
Yeah, I was thinking about your hobby vineyard as well. Tell us a little bit about that, and has that been your main foray into viticulture generally? It seems like you took the trajectory, like you said, obviously to academia, but into the business side of wine versus maybe spending a lot of time making wine or in the vineyards, or do I have that wrong?
No, you are correct, Brady. My focus was academia, the business side of wine, because that's what my PhD is.
Yeah.
What my job was. So the hobby vineyard was something that was for fun on the side, and I learned so much. If you plant your own vineyard, you learn everything about rootstock, soil analysis, irrigation, pests, powdery mildew, you name it. I went through all of it. So I planted the vineyard. It's about 1/4 of an acre, 120 vines of Pinot Noir, which originally were up, I grafted them over, but so I learned all about grafting. And I hired people to help me with a lot of this. I dug some of the holes myself. It's really hard to dig a deep enough hole to plant a grapevine in rock. I live in the Petaluma Gap region of Sonoma County, which I live on a hillside up on the hillside of Sonoma Mountain. So it's rocky volcanic soil, and there's actually big rocks coming out of my vineyard, and it's also clay. So it's really hard soil with rocks. And so I ended up hiring people, and it was so rocky that they couldn't use the mechanical post hole digger. It was too dangerous. And the whole vineyard had to be dug by hand. And then, purchasing the grapevines and figuring out which kind of rootstock to use and all that. It was fascinating. I learned so much. And then, after the vineyard came online a few years later, I had already started taking the winemaking classes, and so bought all the whole winemaking equipment with my husband and got the neighbors to help harvest. Many years I had my wine MBA students come and help me harvest if they were interested at big parties, and it was just so much fun. It taught me, I would have to say, Billy, that in taking the MW exam, I passed the written part, the theory part right away. And I think what really helped me was that intense background, the hands-on background in viticulture and winemaking, because I made every mistake you could, and you really learn from mistakes. Like one year in my winemaking, I bought a barrel and I was traveling, and so it didn't get topped in time. So I got a really bad, VA problem. And then, that barrel was almost impossible to recover from. So then it became a planter. And, so it was Another year I had issues with more captains, and I was trying to, for the most part, do very low interventionist type of winemaking. It uses as little acetone as possible. And so, as a home winemaker, you don't have all of the sophisticated equipment that you could get in the labs. So that's why I learned a lot in a lot of home winemaking tasting groups. The nice thing about living in the Napa Sonoma area is just the support you get from everybody. But I had never, ever planned on going commercial. It is and still is a hobby. I got a lot of my neighbors interested too. And so they started planting hobby vineyards. And so now we have a whole group. We call ourselves that.
That's what I was going to ask. Would you recommend that more enthusiasts plant little, a couple rows of vines in their backyard, or is that too deep down the rabbit hole for most people?
Not if you're an enthusiast, it's not. And, I even encourage people, go buy a grapevine, put it in intend it, and you could sometimes buy those. So it's the one nice thing about a grapevine is they are very forgiving. They love to grow. It's almost impossible to kill them. And you don't even necessarily have to have a green thumb to grow.
Yeah, I live in LA, but we aspire eventually to move back up to the Bay Area. My wife is from there originally, and I'm hoping to get a little place for a hobby vineyard as well. So that is on the radar. Although I was thinking of more acres. Now that you've said how hard it was for you to till, I'm a little concerned. Or not till.
In LA, LA was one of the first places they did vineyards too in California. Let them row in your backyard and see what happens.
Yeah. That's the thing. That's the oxymoron of LA in a backyard. Yeah. No. I'm actually really big into Los Angeles wine history. It's fascinating and something not enough people talk about. And what is fun is we do have grapevines growing throughout our neighborhood. I harvested some cuttings last year and have a couple in a pot like you recommended. So I'm doing what I can with the space I have right now. Yeah. Although I think a cat might have jumped on one of them, and I just went up to it the other day and it was snapped in half almost. So I've taped it frantically because anyway, that's neither here nor there.
Where you always have next year, your robot.
Yeah, that's true. And the roots I know are growing, but I've already waited a whole year. Anyway, love to transition then. So you've built this career, and also, your passion, you became I guess one of the things I wanted to touch on now is you're the president of the Wine Market Council. How did some of that previous work culminate into you being a part of the Market Council and then ultimately becoming president?
Oh, yeah. Thank you. Yeah. So the Wine Market Council is a scientific nonprofit. It was started in 1996, and it has one major mission, and that is conducting research on the U.S. wine consumer, just trying to understand their attitudes, purchasing habits, and trends so that wine businesses around the world can, better market and sell their wines to meet their needs. And so as a professor at Sonoma State, we were members of the Wine Market Council for years and years. And I always relied upon their research in putting together my lectures and in writing and publishing papers and so forth. So I've been using their research for a long time. And when I retired from Sonoma State, I was retired only for 2 months. And the Wine Market Council board approached me and said, "Hey, we have an opening. Would you like to interview for this job?" And I went, "No, I just retired. No, I'm going to take some time off." And they're like, "Yeah, but this is a part-time job." Yeah, anyway, but it's a part-time job. It's supposed to be a part-time job. And it's, right up your alley, which is true. I've been conducting research on wine consumers around the world, but this is just for the U.S., but for 20 years. And so I started thinking about it and discussed it with my husband, who's retired. And I thought, yeah, it's a remote job. I can do it from anywhere, and I can, keep my, research hat on and better still stay connected with the industry. So I said yes. And that was a year and a half ago now. And it's been fun. It's been a blast. It has been more work than I expected, but it's really fun because right now in this job, I really feel like I'm helping to give back and support the wine industry and provide them with really useful data that can help shape highly successful and effective marketing and sales strategies.
What are some of the findings from this past year what are some major trends that you guys are currently seeing? And then maybe after that, something that surprised you that maybe you weren't expecting from the past year?
Yeah. So every year we do 3 to 4 big studies and our members identify the topic. So we brainstorm a big list of what's hot, what should we do research on this year. And we take everybody's, membership dues and we fund that research. That's why we're not. And so what was really important for the last year, and keep in mind, we've been doing this since 1996. So we have, the number of research reports and data we have, it's astounding. It's an incredible database that members have access to. But we did it last year on young adults and multicultural consumers, what we could do to attract more of them. And that was a huge study. It was a big national study, and we started by doing shop-alongs. We literally we had recruited young adults and multicultural consumers across the nation to go shopping for wine. And we had a special software where they actually used their smartphone in the stores of the restaurants and talking about as they were walking down the aisle what they were seeing or what they were seeing on the menu or when they went to a wine bar, and they had somebody in their, they had their earpods on and somebody asking them questions and they were answering live. So we ended up with 46 hours of data on what they were seeing, video, and then we followed that up with a big national survey. So the results from that are pretty astounding. We're still deciphering all of them, and I can give you a few of the highlights in a minute. And then the other big study we did, so that was 2 separate studies, and then we also did a study on direct-to-consumer. And we had over 9,000 consumers respond to that. And it was sort of like, what works for you in DTC? Why do you join wine clubs? Why do you quit wine clubs? What do you need in terms of more online DTC support and so forth? So that was, of course, really of interest to a lot of our smaller wineries who are making most of their revenues that way. This year, we have 4 big studies. The first one, we're almost done with it. It's on eco-friendly wine. So we're looking at what do consumers really want in terms of sustainability, organic, regenerative, B Corp, you name it, lightweight bottles. So we did that study about 4 or 5 years ago, and we're repeating it, but we're adding a lot more. 4 or 5 years ago, regenerative wasn't really a term, and now it is, right? So that's a trend, new thing that's coming up. We're also doing one on reducing barriers to purchase, a third one on dietary and wellness, since that's such a hot topic right now. And then we're doing at the end of the year our big consumer benchmark study, which we do every 2 years. That's a snapshot what the U.S. wine consumer is like. And that's the one we pull our trends from. So right now, hot trends in the market, you probably know these. I've written a lot about them. I write part-time for Forbes on this topic, is alcohol-free wines, which grew 27.2% last year and the year before 30%. So it's this whole wellness trend that's happening, and especially since COVID, people are drinking less alcohol, but they're still spending a lot. In fact, we just got the numbers on revenues in the U.S. for last year, and they were they were again ahead of the previous year. So I think it was $109 billion spent on wine last year. And then 2023, it was $105 billion. So it's interesting, even though volume is down, revenues up. Part of that has to do with inflation, but the other part has to do with just trading out. Consumers will want to drink less, but drink better. And so that's a super important thing. It is unfortunately hurting producers who are focused on the low end of the market, and it's hurting grape growers who are, focused on that side of the market because, they're having to pull out their vines, etc. So we see opportunities in this low or no alcohol category because the good wines, and they're starting to be better. Let's be honest, they haven't been made good, the taste-wise, but they're starting to get better because the technology is getting better. And they need high-quality wine grapes to go into those wines. Otherwise, you don't get high-quality wine. So there's a silver lining there. Another big trend right now is anything to do with RTDs or convenient wine cocktails, flavored wines, fruit-infused wines, anything along that is super, super trendy. that's grown even more. That was a 30% increase. Unfortunately, RTDs, again, is a certain segment of the market, a certain type of producer that's making those wines. So I go in wine, sorry about that noise. In the Napa Valley, for example, is probably not going to make RTDs. But they could perhaps serve a wine cocktail at their tasting room, just to let consumers know there's something else to do with wine. We're looking for more wine occasions. Another trend is people don't see as many occasions to drink wine as they used to. So we are encouraging wineries to expand, to think out of the box on where you can drink wine. So those are just a few of the hot trends right now. Sauvignon Blanc, light, crisp wines are really trending. Sauvignon Blanc, Pinot Grigio, you probably heard that. Certain categories of Cabernet are doing well. Higher end luxury wines are still doing fine. And the last one I wanted to mention, this is an oddball kind of trend, but it's we're seeing it more and more, is high alcohol sweet red wines. It's like 17, 18% high alcohol, more like a port almost, like a ruby port, but like brands like XXL are capitalizing on this, and there's new ones coming into the market every day. And it's targeted more at 20-somethings who really like that, the ripe, fruity flavors, and they like the higher alcohol. So it's funny. It reminds me when I did a semester abroad at Oxford when I was in college, and I was 19. I still remember in that time in Europe, and still is, you can legally drink. And I remember one of my first drinks, besides Guinness beer, was a ruby port. And it was, a 19% alcohol ruby port. I was 19 years old. My girlfriends and I were drinking it. This is the most delicious thing ever, because it's sweet and it gives you a little bit of a buzz. And, it makes sense to me now that, for some Gen Zs, 21 and above, that these high alcohol sweet wines could be popular.
It's interesting when you go through those trends that to me, some of them or several of them seem to be in conflict with one another. For instance, there's the description of sort of consumers moving up market a bit, but then there's also the conversation about RTDs being more popular. And certainly I know that there's a sort of a cost band segment for RTDs as well, like $25 for a 4-pack of cans is certainly up market, but that seems to be a bit in conflict. In the occasion piece I thought was really fascinating. That also seems to be in conflict with moving up market, because the idea to me of drinking wine more often would be that you're probably drinking cheaper wine, on Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, when normally you would just drink a nice bottle on the weekend with friends. And so curious, I guess the question to come out of that is slightly different though, which is which of those trends or of the current trends do you believe have staying power, and which of them do you believe are just sort of like, yeah, this is the headline of the year of today, not sure how much staying power or longevity it has?
Oh, yeah, that's a great question, Brady. I think luxury wines are always going to have staying power. You'll always have the wealthy consumer who wants to buy that special wine. And so that's why we're seeing, I just heard some of the numbers yesterday, $50 and above is quite healthy. Especially now that you have a lot of baby boomers who, they're in their 60s. They have, they've got plenty of money. And then you've got the ultra rich, the top 1%-2% who, are still, it doesn't matter. They're going to buy those wines. So luxury is always going to be a solid trend. In terms of RTDs, I think convenience is great. And I think you're always going to have some type of RTDs. I don't know that we're going to have as many in the future. But right now it's super trendy. In the no-lull wine category, that's an interesting one. I posted something on LinkedIn the other day about will alcohol-free wines become like decaf coffee, where they're just always an option on every menu. And oh my gosh, the amount of controversy in that question, great. Because a true wine lover is offended by alcohol-free wines. They get really upset. I mean, like, why are they calling this wine, and why I would never drink that, and why is it even a category? But I think that's actually one that we are going to see staying in the long term. Obviously, nothing's going to surpass real wine. What we see with wine drinkers now is a lot of them are having a glass of non-alcoholic wine, and then they're having a glass of regular wine. So they're still drinking wine. They're just not, they just don't want as much alcohol in their system because of this wellness piece. The other thing was two other positives about non-alcoholic wine is one is you're not going to have to pull out as many vineyards, right? Because they're going to be, it's going to be a home for these wine grapes. And two is it's more inclusive. So for those people, and I've talked to a lot of people like this. In fact, I went to a party last week. There was a guy there, and he brought his bottle of alcohol-free Ariel Cabernet Sauvignon. He was asking everybody to taste it. This was a wine tasting party where we were tasting old red wines, and he brought this wine. He said, I can't drink right now for health reasons, but I want to feel like I'm part of the party. I want to feel included. So I brought my wine, and please taste it. I think you'll like it. So that's that whole other perspective I think wine drinkers are forgetting is we need to be inclusive and open to people wherever they are in their journey. And there's going to be sometimes for health reasons or other reasons when people can't drink alcohol, but they still want to attend the event or the party and have a glass in their hand. That's why I'm thinking that trend, especially as the wine gets better, and it is slowly getting better, that was probably going to stay.
Ariel that you
Yeah.
Ariel, sorry to cut you off, but Ariel that you mentioned is J. Lore. Is that correct?
That's
okay.
correct.
Yeah. I just pulled up their site, and it's interesting on the page for Ariel. They show the Chardonnay and I guess the cab. Is it the cab? Yeah. So the cab and the Chardonnay, but then at the bottom they have a list of recipes for mocktails. Chardonnay spritz, cab citrus cooler. So I think it's really interesting how that's woven into the idea of the allure of picking up an alcohol-free wine.
Yeah, and Jerry Lohr invented that wine for his wife who couldn't drink. Because she'd be going to all these wine dinners with him, and he wanted her to feel included. It's actually sort of a romantic story. In fact, I think it was the first brand. He started that brand in the 80s, and then in the 90s, you had Free, F-R-E, hit the market, and that was created by the Chinkara family. And those two dominating. And Ariel just came out with a brand new line of wines that they're trying to change the way they make them. He tried to use some of the newer technologies. But most of the really good alcohol wines are coming out of Europe. The Germans again have figured out the technology, and whatever they're doing over there, I think it was based on a Geisenheim. Some of their wines just exquisite. I'm not like pushing alcohol-free wines. I'm looking at the data, and I'm looking at I'm listening to what consumers are saying, and so it's a trend right now. It's a trend that I think it's going to eventually, in 3 to 5 years, will not be as popular. So I would prefer to people to really make a lot of that. But I think it's not going to go away. I think it's just going to become one of the options that's available in the future.
That makes sense. I think also one of the paradoxes that you mentioned is, I guess, with that no-low movement is also the high alcohol and sweet with Gen Z. Like those are literally polar opposites. Maybe not literally the sweetness, but I know you had me thinking back. I actually, in college too, drank a lot of there's a favorite canned beverage. I won't necessarily name the name. That was really high alcohol and sweet. And then there was also I remember we actually had port in our room as well, in our dorm room as sophomores. And people remembered that for some reason. They would come years later and be like, you guys were the ones with the port. But so I guess that is a thing that appeals, I guess it has to younger folks for a while. How have you seen anybody in their surveys saying I am drinking these higher alcohol sweet wines, but also concerned about my health at the same time, and I'm 25 years old? Or I guess are they not as concerned about their health since they are, so young?
Yeah, good question. So I think two different consumers there. In fact, where we first started hearing about these high alcohol sweet wines was when we did interviews with all these young consumers. So we discovered how many of them were drinking them. And then we started looking at the data, and it's a growing category. Keep in mind they're in their 20s, and so basically what they told us is there's a time where I want to have more alcohol and have fun, in my system. And then there's another time when I just really don't want to. But they said that oftentimes the reason they're choosing the no or low alcohol is when they want to stay alert, when they're studying, of course, when they're going to drive. They want both of those options. And it just reminded me of coffee, because I'm the kind of person, when I wake up in the morning, I need a cup of coffee before I can even talk, right? And that kind of caffeine person. But then after I have my 2 cups of coffee every morning, I don't touch caffeine again, because then I get jittery and freaked out and so forth. Like if I'm going to have a cup of coffee in the evening, I'm going to get a decaf. But yeah, it may not taste as good, but hey, it's giving me the flavor of coffees. I think that's what we're seeing is it depends on the occasion, and then it depends on, the person too. You do have these really, some of the people who are very health conscious and they do worry about it. But I do remember one quote from one Gen Zer. She said, "No, I don't worry about the alcohol or the calories. I just want to enjoy wine because it tastes good. I don't want to, she says, I don't care about that stuff. It's more like I'm going to have a chocolate. I'm going to enjoy it and not worry about how many calories are in that chocolate, And so there's that point too, and that reminds me, like when I'm going to have a big, beautiful Napa Cabernet Sauvignon that's 15.5% alcohol, some of them. And they're just so absolutely delicious and velvety and dreamy and concentrated. And all I want to do is just revel in the sheer joy of that wine and not worry about all that other stuff. It's about pleasure, at that point. So it's that occasion, it's that motivation, it's the differences in consumers.
The comparison to no low and decaf coffee, I think, is interesting. I actually don't drink caffeine. So when I drink coffee, I drink decaf, and everyone makes fun of me. But something that's interesting there is, and maybe able to speak a little bit to this, but the alcohol in wine has much more of a structural sort of component, is much more of a structural component to the wine itself than caffeine is in coffee. So those two things are the starkest contrast with that comparison, although I think that your comment about the sort of staying power of that as an option in the market is the right comparison to make, even though removing alcohol from wine is vastly different than removing caffeine from coffee, I believe.
When you strip the wine of the alcohol, you end up with a very thin, bitter product. And the way they're making it now is they actually have to add back some of the flavors and the essence and the smell, of the wine. And they always add back just a little bit of the pure grape juice. You really need to do, Billy and Brady, I'm sure you've gone up to Sauvignon Blanc, plant and pulled a Sauvignon Blanc very often, put it in your mouth, and you taste that grape, and it just tastes like Sauvignon Blanc. It just has all those wonderful flavors of lemon and lime and grass and grapefruit. And sometimes you get some of the white peach in it. And so what they're doing then is they're taking that actual pure grape and that grape juice that comes from it, and they're adding a little of it back into the wine so that pure Sauvignon Blanc taste or whatever it is you're making, you can taste it again. So that's how a lot of the newer ones are making it taste better, because it is really hard when you strip the alcohol. It takes away that mouthfeel. And that's why a lot of non-alcoholic beers are so successful, because beers have bubbles. We're finding too with alcohol-free wine, if it's sparkling, it usually tastes much better. And I've tasted 2 non-alcohol or alcohol-free sparkling wines that blew me away. And I tasted it with friends too, and they're like, wow, I would not know this was alcohol-free wine. It tastes delicious, and it has the bubbles on my palate, and it reminds me just of a regular glass of champagne or sparkling wine.
Interesting. I guess the type of the mousse, or I guess the profile of the mousse would be interesting if it was actually as fine as a champagne, if they were able to charge it that way. That'd be pretty cool if you could emulate a secondary fermentation bottle.
The two I wrote about them in Forbes a couple of weeks ago. In fact, that article had the most hits of any article I've ever written in 3 years. And my editor wrote to me, she said, "Oh my gosh, this article is just," and the name of the article was 5 alcohol-free wines to try now that actually taste delicious. Because people are looking for them, but they can't buy. Does it taste good? And my two top ones were Bloom. Bolle, Bolle, which is based out of Spain, and they're doing a double fermentation of that wine, and it's $40 a bottle. But it's pretty mind blowing in terms of you wouldn't guess that it didn't have alcohol in it. And then the other is French Bloom, which is out of France, and French Bloom is being backed by LVMH, and the Bolle out of Spain is being backed by the Torres family. So you've got some big supporters behind those brands and money in the technology. And then the other thing that really surprised me is just the amount of money the European Union is putting into alcohol-free wine production. And they're actually creating large facilities and custom crush to make these types of wines in Spain and in France. And now Italy has finally changed its policies. Italy didn't allow alcohol-free wine. They thought it was blasphemy like many consumers. But now they've just recently changed that. So the Italians were taking their wine and taking it to Germany and having it made into alcohol-free wine. So it's interesting that the amount of movement that's happening also from a regulatory standpoint on this in Europe. Not here in the U.S. yet, but big movement in Europe on this.
Along with that, are you seeing alternative packaging types also being embraced if people are looking outside of the norm in general, or are they still wanting these wines but in the glass bottles? I guess the same goes for alcohol with wine.
Well, so I think the RTD is a good example of an alternative form. The reason people love those is because it's so easy to drink. You just buy it. It's in the right, serving size, what's in it, and it tastes good. So in that sense, smaller packaging is important. The eco-friendly wine study we're doing right now we're definitely looking into the whole packaging question, but is recycling important, and boxes, cans, lightweight bottles. We're looking at all those issues right now. That survey right now is in the field. It's literally consumers are answering that survey right now. So we'll have the results. We do our webinar March 6th on that for our members. So that's one of the things we're looking at. So there's a whole group of consumers. There's about 30% of U.S. wine consumers who are deeply interested in environmental recycling, packaging, things like that. They're the ones who have a tendency to buy those types of wines. But the ones that want the simple, easy, kind of packaging, they're generally people who are more casual consumers. They want to take them to the beach, or they want to, have them in a backyard barbecue and that kind of thing. But you still have a lot of people who want a wine bottle. And the nice thing about a 750 milliliter wine bottle is it's designed to share, You open up a bottle of wine, the problem is you need glasses. You also sometimes have to get a cork out. So there are those things that sometimes get in the way. But we find consumers, it depends on the occasion. It's back to the occasion again. It's what am I buying this wine for? Who am I going to drink it with? And that sort of determines the packaging.
Awesome. As we're getting a little closer to wrapping up here, I wanted to touch on something that I've been personally curious about. If the industry has all of these trends going on, and there's also the premiumization, which is still holding strong, how have you seen larger companies like the Constellations or the Gallos of the world compared to maybe smaller boutique wines that are battling for those consumers, maybe in that like $20 to $40 space or above? Are they using like social media more? Is it all about that in-store placement in your grocery stores? What are you seeing being successful so far?
Yeah, so I look at those two examples, the very large, corporate wineries versus the small boutique wineries, as two completely different players and two completely different business models and two completely different ways of going to market and different relationships you're building. Because, if you're large, you definitely need to have good relationship with your distributors and with the trade and, getting your wine. Right now, it's a battle for shelf space, trying to get your wines on the shelf, trying to get that news out. So that group right there really needs to, spending a lot more time on e-commerce and social and getting the word out to consumers. Whereas the boutique, the smaller terroir focused winery that's not necessarily in, Safeway or Walmart, they're focused more on DTC, and that's where most of the revenues come from. They're also, needing to be a lot more creative when it comes to their events. One of the things we're seeing that's working well, I call them pop-up tastings or mobile wine tourism, getting out of your tasting room, because wine tourism is down, getting out of your tasting room, going to where your consumers are, using things like the geological, the geographical positioning to figure out where do we have most consumers? Where can we do these pop-up events? Where can we connect with them? Who can we partner with? Let's partner with a taco truck. Let's go to this festival. Let's do. So that it's so competitive now, especially with the volume going down, that people really need to think out of the box. But at the same time, you still have some wineries. They have such a large group of loyal consumers, but they're needing to keep those consumers engaged. I interviewed a winery in upstate New York yesterday, and their wine club is growing, their DTC is growing, and they're doing really well. So we found that Mo did a big survey last year. 55% of wineries are still doing really right now, even though it's a tough time. But then you have those others who aren't. We do see wineries up for sale right now because it is competitive. You see vineyards being pulled out because of this. It's a tough time for some, but it's a time to be creative and stay close to your consumer for sure.
Cool. Thanks, Liz. It's been a while since we've been able to go so deep on wine trends. I think we talk about wine trends a lot, but you obviously have so many points of coverage, both in academia, obviously, and then being all around the world doing all kinds of things with wine. Really appreciate your time chatting with us today.
Oh, it's been a pleasure. Thank you for inviting me. And I'm so excited by what you guys are doing. So keep up all your good work. You are getting out there and talking to the consumer and keeping them interested in wine. And wine is, of course, a beverage of pleasure, 8,000 years old. It's always going to be here.
All right. That was our interview with Liz Thach, another one of these amazing women MWs that we've been featuring lately. I hope everybody enjoyed the interview, learned a bit about the wine market and trends. And we will be transitioning back to some more producer interviews in the coming weeks. So stay tuned. We have some exciting interviews coming. But for now, that is our episode for this week. And we'll be back with another episode next week. Cheers.